Hello my crafty family. Today we will be making this super adorable mini backpack. I am a huge fan of backpacks because you cannot deny the practicality of them. You throw it on your back, you got two free hands, and as a mom, those are super important. It's also even a great toddler size backpack. You would just want to shorten the straps. I realize people are either team backpack or they hate them, but I'm assuming if you're here, you love backpacks and you want to learn how to make it. So that's what we're going to do today. I just want to show you the little features of this. This front one is a 3D pocket. You can see it's got a little bit of a depth to it there. You open it up, you've got two pen slots and then a larger slip pocket. I'll often put my sunglasses there. And then there's a little bit more depth here to add any other essentials that I need ready access to. You flip it around and you have this large zipper pocket here. Add a nice long pull to it and you can actually get access to your phone without even taking it off your back. There's this optional key clasp here. You don't have to put your keys there. You can even put, a mask or whatever. When you open it up on the inside, you have a slip pocket and a very roomy interior. So throw it on your back. All I have to do is grab that long pole and then I can grab my phone. For today's make, we're going to be making a mini backpack out of all quilter's cotton for the exterior. So that is what this piece is. So anytime you're using straight quilter's cotton, I do recommend you add a woven interfacing to all of those pieces because it is otherwise way too lightweight. Now, to speed things up and to prevent shrinkage, what I highly recommend you do for this step is that you block fuse your interfacing to your quilting cotton. So what that means is you just lay out your yardage of quilting cotton and you lay your woven fuse on top and you press it all as one. Then you cut out your pieces. So then it's pretty accurate and you're not trying to fuse two different pieces together and hope that it lines up nicely. So I have on the pattern pieces, there are a bunch of markings that you'll want to transfer onto your pieces. So for the main exterior, there are gusset placement markings that you'll want to lay on top of your piece and mark those. So when we add our external gusset later, that is an important landmark. Then we're going to mark our centers on all of these. For the lining, we are using a waterproof canvas. I love waterproof canvas. If you've done any of my other patterns, I love to use this as a liner because it offers great structure. You don't have any added interfacing. It's relatively inexpensive and it is waterproof. If you are not using waterproof canvas for the lining, I do recommend you add a Decaville light to all your lining pieces because otherwise you won't have that structure that you need because we're not using foam for this backpack. So for the front exterior zipper pocket, you'll have the three pieces, one being a waterproof canvas, one in your accent, and this is the exterior of the pocket. So I'll also add my gusset markings on the side here. Again, an important landmark, and then my center markings. And on the accent piece, which will be the back side of your zipper pocket when you open it, you'll need to mark your turning hole along those bottoms right there. So then we'll go ahead and go on to the next prep step. So we'll mark all of our centers on each of our pieces. So all of the pattern pieces are included in this. I just did not include a backpack strap pattern because it's 40 inches long and that would be a lot of paper piecing. So before you get started, you do have to cut out your bag straps. So because we're doing quilter's cotton, I cut it out 4 folds. So what we'll do is we'll cut it 4 inches wide because you want it 4 times the width of your strap and it's a 1-inch strap. So we cut it 4 inches wide by 40 inches long. And then you're drawing a line down that center of it and then folding those raw edges in and then folding it once again. One edge is going to be tucked in that back strap anchor, so we do want to finish this end off. The other end does not matter. And we're going to also do the same thing with the carrying handle where we're doing the 4-fold, and then since they're both getting tucked under the anchor, we don't really need to finish that off. If you're using a vinyl, cork, or leather, you're probably not going to want to do the 4-fold method because it's going to be too bulky. Then I would just recommend you do it how we're going to do our rectangle connectors, where you're just folding the long edges into that center and then sew that down because that decreases the amount of layers, and the bulk. So keep that in mind if you're working with cork, vinyl, or leather. On one end of the strap, we will need to finish it. So I have you cut off a slight angle so that we can fold it in and close it this way so it's encased. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But for the interior binding, we're not actually using a fold over binding. We're cutting long strips of the waterproof canvas at 1 inch wide and folding it over those raw seams to bind them. So I've already cut the width of my waterproof canvas, and then you'll need at least 40 inches. So we will cut down any excess that we do not need. Okay, so I've already drawn all my center lines and I've already pressed these off camera. This is the optional key clip. And again, we want to reduce the bulk so it's only the 2 fold. And I'm using a 5/8 inch swivel clasp. So if you're going to use a 1/2 inch or any other size, you're going to double the measurement and fold it to the center in order to get the correct width. Then the rectangle ring, same thing, down the center. We're going to sew just along these edges and make 2. We're going to cut it in half and make 2 connectors. So we just need to finish one end on both bag straps. So to do that, I just clip off a small angle. Usually it's about 45-degree angle off the end here just to reduce bulk. Fold that edge in and then pinch it over to finish it off. And we'll clip that in place. Add clips the rest of the way so that we can sew up the straps. Although my testers have tried this backpack on a domestic machine, so it is totally domestic machine friendly, I am going to be using my Juki DU 1181, and it is a walking foot machine. So I sew along one edge, go along the bottom, and come back up, and it usually doesn't cause any twisting because it's walking along the fabric. But if you're using a domestic machine, I would encourage you to sew along one edge, and then once you get to the bottom, bring it back up and sew in the same direction so that your strap isn't being stretched as you sew, and then you end up with it twisting. Okay, so we now have our 2 shoulder straps. This is our carrying handle, and then this is a rectangle ring connector piece that will be cut in 2. So we fold it in half, thread on our rectangle rings, and then I just clip it in place and set that aside. These will be added to our back exterior later. This is our optional key clip. We're putting the seam side up so that when you fold it over, it's encased and you don't see a raw edge. And then you could either just leave it as is to put it under your anchor. I like to add a rivet, more decorative than anything else, so that's what I'm going to do right now. All right, so these little bits are done. Now grab your interior slip pocket piece, and we're going to go fold it short end to short end, right sides together, and clip in place. Then we're going to sew a 3/8 inch seam allowance, leaving a hole along the bottom so that we can turn it right side out, press it really well, and then we're going to top stitch along this folded edge once we turn it right side out, 1/2 inch below. And we're going to be adding this to the interior liner piece as our slip pocket. So now that we've got it top stitched and turned right side out, my turning holes along the bottom, I'm going to measure up from the bottom of one of my interior liners, 3.5 inches centered on this panel, and sew this in place. So I like to add a little bit of double-sided tape just to kind of keep it in place, since this is a waterproof canvas and it's got the plastic backing. It's not exactly easy to pin. But there's another, this one happens to be like for leather, and with my walking foot it's not been an issue, but if you have a domestic machine or you worry about gumming, there is another brand called Dritz wash away tape that might be a better option. So 3.5 inches centered along here. I'm going to take it to my machine and then sew around this, leaving the top open for our slip pocket, and we'll be done with this piece. So you should have 3 different zippers. Typically I'll do them all the same color, but for this demonstration purpose, I cut 3 different colors just so it could keep them separate and we know which zipper we're talking about. For this next step, we're gonna use the smallest zipper. It's an 8-inch zipper, and we're gonna add a pull to it. So I know a lot of people are intimidated by adding pulls to this, but it's really quite easy. I'm right-handed, so what I like to do is to put the pull on with my right hand and use the left hand to guide it. So what you need to do, it comes together. You do need to separate the top a little bit, and you holding the zipper pull in one hand, you thread the top in there, and then you pull this back like so and stick it in so it looks roughly equal. And then you just, I like to set it down so that I can kind of get it moving, and then you can pull it on like this. So you want to make sure that it's pretty even and not that it's one side is higher than the other, because you'll have a little bowing. So if you don't like that, go ahead and pull it back off and give it another try. The more times that you do this, the easier it does get to getting it just right. So push it on the table. And I like to pull it all the way to the top so that when I install my zipper, I know that this is the top of the zipper. So the next thing you're gonna need is you're gonna need your back panel, which is this main back panel, and then you're gonna have your 2 back zipper liners, one with the waterproof canvas, one the accent. We're gonna set the waterproof canvas one aside, and we're gonna need these pieces to draw our zipper box on. So per instructions, you're gonna have them both wrong side up, and you're gonna take your pattern piece. You're gonna wanna determine which side you want your zipper pocket on. If I'm right-handed, I want the zipper pocket on the right side of my back so that I can grab it with my right arm. So if that's the case, when this is to my back, I want my zipper over here. So I'm gonna flip it wrong side up, and I'm gonna lay the pattern piece right side on top, and I'm gonna draw my zipper box right in between those lines. I draw the little V's. And then, because this is the back side of the pocket, I need to flip my pattern piece over so I can cut them mirrored. So now I want this on the opposite side. Line up my pattern piece like so. Trace the zipper box on your pattern piece. And then we will cut these lines and press the box open. So I cut my boxes, and in order to get the back iron nice flat, I did use a craft glue stick to help keep them flat, and that makes installing the zipper easier this next step. So taking the back main exterior, I did go ahead and add 2 rows of double-sided tape. You can also use the Beacon fabric tack if you want instead of the double-sided tape. I'm gonna go ahead and remove one of the backings off, take my zipper, and I want the pull up at the top, and I'm gonna lay this right on top of it. Try and get it as centered as possible. The zipper is 8 inches and the box is 7 inches. So we're gonna have a 1/2 inch gap along the bottom. So I'm gonna take my time and try and lay it down centered on the zipper. I only do one side of the tape at a time so that I can just work with the one side before the other side sticks, because it tends to want to do that. And then once I get it nice and straight, and I don't want it wavy, then I can peel the other side off. Do that right now. There are little lines on the tape, so try and find one of the lines to keep that edge nice and even with. So once you're happy with the way your zipper is positioned, it's not wavy, then we're gonna go ahead and flip it over and take your back lining piece and lay it wrong sides together, smack dab right over it. We'll go ahead and clip these bottom corners in place so that it doesn't shift. And then we'll flip it back over, and we're gonna take it to our machine, and we're gonna sew an 1/8 inch seam allowance all the way around the box, securing it in place, and then you'll end up having a nice lined interior pocket. And then you're gonna take your waterproof canvas piece, and then we're gonna lay the whole thing together as one and then baste all the way around here so that you will have a nice lined usable pocket. All right, so I've basted those 3 pieces as one, and as you can see now we have a nice lined pocket. I did sew an 1/8 inch around this, and I just stopped right here. This part is still technically open, but we are going to close that when we add our strap anchor piece. So before we get started with this, we do need to iron these down 1/4 inches to the back side, and that's where I'm going to use the craft glue stick again to kind of keep it in place. And then I'll add a piece of the double-sided adhesive along the lower edge and place it up here and trim it down to size. Okay, so now that we have this prepped and ready to go, I'm going to pull off the bottom portion of the adhesive, and we're going to measure down 1 1/4 inch from the center back. And that is how we're going to go ahead and lay this down. So it's the bottom edge that I removed the adhesive of, and then put this right here. And then we're going to flip it over and follow the curve of this back panel and cut it down to size. So it'll look just like so. And then I'm going to take the optional key clip. If you're doing this, you're going to want to measure in 2 inches from this right hand edge, or whatever opposite side of your zipper, and tuck this under a 1/2 inch. So we got to peel off this bottom a little bit. Measure the 2 inches and go ahead and put it under there. Okay, we're going to start first with the carrying handle. So we do have to remove that top backing to the adhesive. And from our center marking up top, we're going to loop this just as like so and tuck it all the way down to the bottom adhesive where the flat edges sit there. And I like a 1/2 inch gap between these straps. So just kind of eyeballing it for now. I'm going to grab my sieve gauge just to verify that it's a 1/2 inch. It's good. And it's on our center marking, and then I'll press it down into the adhesive. So the bottom straight edge is hitting right at this adhesive down here, and there's a 1/2 inch gap, and it's looped correctly. So if this was cork, leather, or vinyl, you would want your the seam, that center seam, tucked on this side, so it'll be facing your back. So when we tuck it this way, the seam is hidden against your back, and it's not seen from the front of the backpack. So just something to keep in mind if you do have a center seam. Now for these backpack straps, we have the finished end, which we want to leave alone on both ends, and we want the opposite end. We need to cut it on a very slight angle. It works out to be like 30 degrees. It's not a huge angle, just a little bit of an angle on both ends that are unfinished. Slight angle. This is going to allow the backpack to lay nicely on your back, because if you put it straight in like this and then you go to separate it to put it on your shoulders, you get this weird ripple right there. It doesn't want to go that way. But if you cut it on a slight angle, it's naturally going to go up and over your shoulder correctly. Again, if you're doing the leather, cork, or vinyl and you have a center seam, you want that center seam face up so that when it's in here and goes up over your shoulder, the seam is hidden and you can't see it. But you will need to cut your angles mirrored. So you have that center seam. You don't want to cut them both on that angle. You want them opposite so that they get tucked in directly next to the center strap all the way along the bottom. Butt it up right there. So the key thing to keep in mind when you're positioning this strap is you need some clearance right here, because when we go to add the external gusset, we don't want a huge angle, and now we have no room to sew it. So just keep that in mind as you are positioning your straps. And then we want this angle on this side, tucked right up next to our carrying handle and along that bottom adhesive, and then press it. So now your strap should come up nicely and be able to go over your shoulder pretty well. So we're going to take this to the machine. I like to do 2 rows of stitching just for added security. I do it an 1/8 inch from this edge around, and then I go 1/4 inch above that and around. And then I add rivets center to each of these, but that's strictly optional. Okay, so technically this back part is done, but I'm gonna go ahead and add some decorative rivets here. It just adds security, but also is just more bag bling. You don't necessarily need it. I'm gonna draw your attention to the back here that this pocket is now closed, and it is a fully functioning pocket that goes the entire width of this pocket. So I'm gonna do that right now, add my rivets, and then we will go ahead and baste in place our rectangular rings. So now we're going to take our rectangle ring connectors and put them right in the corner. I like to leave a little bit of an overhang so that when I sew it in place, then I can make sure I cut all edges, and then we'll trim it down so that it's nice and flush with the edge. We don't really want to leave this overhang because when we attach the binding later, that will get in the way. So sew a couple layers over there so that it's nice and secure, but this will also get caught in the seam of the gusset and then also the seam of the binding. So you'll have plenty of stitching there to keep it nice and secure. Okay, we're just about done with this back exterior panel. So we want to pair it with the interior liner. So if this is the back of your backpack and you're looking in, you want the liner with the pocket to be on that back side. So what we're gonna do is line up all the edges here and clip them in place. So now you have wrong sides together. You have two right sides. This is your liner, this is your exterior. We're gonna go ahead and baste around this edge, making it one panel, an 1/8 inch from the edge. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and kind of coil up our backpack straps so that they stay out of the way. And we're just gonna tuck them in this zippered pocket. So when we move on to installing the gusset, we don't risk getting them caught and in the way of everything. So I just like to tuck it in and keep it out of the way for the next step. So then we'll work on the front. Our back panel is done. Now time to move on to the front. So we're gonna start with that front zipper pocket, which I realize is probably the scariest part of this whole project. First, you're gonna grab your interior slip pocket piece and you're gonna fold it wrong sides together like so. And we're gonna top stitch a 1/2 inch from this top edge. Then we're gonna take our ruler and we're gonna measure in 2 inches from this left-hand edge and draw a line with a removable marking tool. This is a little chalk pen. And then from that line, we're gonna do a 1/2 inch or 1.5 inch, another line. If you don't need 2 little pen slip pockets, feel free to just do 2 separate pockets or a bigger pocket and a single pen pocket, whatever you want. But I like to put like a lip gloss and a pen or whatever, and then my sunglasses in this spot. So we're gonna do our top stitch along this top edge, and then we're gonna add it to our waterproof canvas piece on top. All right, so I just top stitch along this top folded edge, a 1/2 inch from the top. And now I'm gonna lay it on the waterproof canvas exterior zipper pocket and line up the 2 sides and the bottom edge. And clip that in place. And then I'm gonna flip the panel over and following this bottom curve, trim it so it's rounded as well. So now I'm gonna take it to my sewing machine, and starting here, I'm gonna go ahead and sew an 1/8 inch from the edge along the bottom, and then an 1/8 inch from the center line. I'm gonna go up 1 stitch over, down another 1/8 inch this side, go down 1/8 inch from that center line, couple stitches, down, and around until we end here. So then we'll have our 3 usable pockets. And then because we have a little center gap with our stitches, I do like to add rivets there just to kind of help with any wear and tear in that spot. But it's strictly optional because you do have that 2 row of stitching, so it should be fine. Okay, so the back of that inner front pocket is done. We're gonna set that aside and we're gonna work on our zipper gusset. So you should have 2 strips for the gusset. One's an accent and one's the exterior. If you're using leather, I wouldn't even interface the accent piece because we want that part pretty lightweight, but because this is both quilting cotton, they do have the Shape Flex 101 on the back. So we are left with 2 zippers so far. We want the shorter of the 2. This is the 16-inch zipper, and we're gonna put the main zipper off to the side. And I do have to add the pull again. So I'm gonna separate it, hold it in my right hand. If I'm right-handed, thread the one side, pull it apart a little bit, and then tuck that in so you can kind of feel it click. I do find it help putting it on the table. And then put it all the way to the end so you know that that's the closed side, okay? So now we're gonna create a zipper sandwich using our gusset pieces. So this is our exterior. We want it face down on the top part of the zipper, and then this face up along that part of the zipper. We're gonna clip that in place and sew a 3/8 inch seam allowance on this end. Press them away from the zipper and top stitch 1/8 inch from the edge. Then we're gonna repeat it with the opposite end and open it up and top stitch. So we're gonna do that at the machine right now. So I've got my zipper sandwich. Right sides are facing for the exterior of the zipper and the exterior of the gusset. So I'm gonna use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we're gonna press both pieces away from our zipper. Finger press, and then top stitch that. Then we're going to repeat with the other side. Gets a little confusing because the zipper is much longer than the gusset, so I do have to right sides exterior and the right side of the zipper together, and then pull up along the back side. So the right side of the accent is along the back side of the zipper now. And line these up the edges, and we're going to do another 3/8 inch seam allowance. So it's kind of loopy, looks a little confusing. Okay, so again, we're going to have to finger press it away from our zipper and top stitch. Okay, trim that down. All right, so I've already added my center markings on my gusset pieces here, but I do have to find the center of my zipper. So I'm gonna fold these together and fold this in half and give these little snip notches so that I know my center, because now we're gonna go to our front zipper pocket and line up our landmarks. So here you go. Now we're gonna grab the front portion of this zipper pocket, and we have our zipper gusset landmarks marked here, and we have our center and bottom notches, and we've got our notches here. So this is the gusset seam that I'm talking about. So we're gonna lay that on top like so, and we want the top of the zipper face down on the top of the main panel here, and we're gonna clip that landmark. So then I have my zipper pull to the left, and I'm gonna take that gusset seam and I'm gonna line it up with this side marking here and clip. And I'm gonna repeat, make sure the zipper is face down on top of this, and the seam right here, we're lining right up with that gusset mark. And then we need to be able to see the liner of the gusset. So line them together and then face down. So the exterior pieces are both facing each other. So then from here, we're gonna ease in these curves. But I like to cut little notches around these curves so that it does help that zipper ease into place and this ease into the place. So I'll do that right now. So ideally, if you got your accurate seam allowances, you've cut everything the correct size, it should fit perfectly. And by following these little landmarks, you ensure that your zipper panels aren't offset. So this next part, I'm gonna go ahead and sew. In the pattern, I say a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but that's mainly important for this bottom edge because we're gonna need to leave a turning hole on the accent piece. And if we only did an 1/8 inch, it would mess up this bottom portion. So I'm gonna follow a 1/4 inch along this bottom edge, but then I'm gonna kind of just ride around the edge because I'm essentially just basting the zipper in place so it doesn't shift before I sandwich the accent piece on top. All right, so when I sewed this, I went really slow around the curves, making sure that my edges of the zipper were following the edges of this. And I tried to keep a pretty rounded edge. This is going to be really important when you go to install the zipper onto the front main panel. So just go slow there and just take your time with that. I also find unzipping it easier to manipulate the zipper under there. So I tend to kind of want to clip this so it's out of the way. Now we're going to take the lining piece and sandwich it on top. Earlier I had you mark the turning hole, but actually you really do need it on this side so you could see what you're doing. I apologize for that. So I'm just going to transfer that to there. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark or line up the 4 corners and clip them in place. Before we do take it to the machine, this turning hole, we're going to start and stop going around here and ending here so that we can flip this front portion of the pocket right side out. And this is why that 1/4 inch was really important here, because we're going to do a 1/4 inch on the rest of the seam allowance here. All right, so I've got it all pinned and clipped in place, and I'm going to start from this marking here, and this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so that works out to be like the edge of my foot. So I use the edge of my foot to go around this curve, and I'm going to go real slow around the curves because I want a nice smooth curve. If it's jaggedy at all and you turn it right side out, you're going to see that. So I would highly encourage you to seam rip it if you have some jagged edges, or go back over it and round it if need be, because this front pocket is kind of a focal point. You really don't want to jack it up. And then don't be afraid to hand crank around rounded corners. I do it a lot because I care how those look. All right. And as I'm pushing it through my machine, I'm feeling for a zipper pull somewhere. I have my zipper open, so I know that it's on the other side, but I'm pushing the teeth down, and I'm keeping my edge of my foot along this curve. I'm coming up on my zipper pull here, so I'll have to be mindful of that so I can move it out of the way so my seam allowance can be maintained at that 1/4 inch. Get it out of the way there. And continue. This is obviously a tighter curve than those top curves, so I'm hand cranking. I don't trust my machine to go slow. All right. Trim that down, and then we can pull our pocket right side out. Now's the time to take a look at that zipper, because if it looks wonky, again, I would encourage you to seam rip and give it another go so that your focal point of your bag looks good. And I'm happy with that. So I'm going to give it a press, and then I'll show you the next step. All right, so we've got the front part of our zipper done. When we flip it over, you can go ahead and give it a press with your iron so it's nice and crisp. You're pulling that out. And then go ahead and press this bottom part up. You can do a finger press with your iron, and then tuck that raw edge under. And we want to pull the raw edge just beyond our basting stitch from earlier, so that when we top stitch it, we're gonna not see that seam and we're gonna catch it. So I'm gonna cut a length of double-sided tape just to hold it in place. You can also use the beacon fabric tack to hold it in place, but we don't want it shifting when we top stitch, because we'll be sewing from the top and we can't really see this part. But if you tape it in place or glue it in place in the right landmark, then you'll ensure that you get it. So pulling it just beyond my stitching, like so. And again, I'm gonna just press it, and then we're gonna go to the machine, and starting along the bottom, we're gonna sew an 1/8 inch from this bottom all the way around here, and that will close this hole as well. All right, so since the front of the pocket's more important than the inside, honestly, I'm gonna sew from the top. So that's why I said you wanna make sure you have it typed really well, because you can't really see it. So just starting along this bottom, the edge of this inner foot is an 1/8 inch, so that's where my guide is now. So the 1 foot hangs on the other side, and the edge of this is what I'm gonna use as my guide. So I don't backstitch for this part. I like to pull my threads to the back and tie them off. And again, when you get around that corner, hand crank so that it looks good. Pulling your gusset out of the way. You don't want to catch it in your seam. Give it some tension as you pull. Sometimes opening that zipper. Do whatever works for you. Sometimes this gets in the way, sometimes it's out of the way, but I like to be able to use the fingernail on the teeth to give it some tension as I go. And I do a lot of hand cranking because I would rather take that extra time and have it look nice than let my presser foot run away and not have a good 1/8 inch seam allowance. Pull your gusset out of the way at the bottom here. Tight curve, so I'm going to hand crank it. Alright, and then while I got it, I'm going to go ahead and pull my threads to the back here, so it's out of the way. And right where we started. Pull it out. And then this one I also have to pull the thread to the back. So as you can see, we got our hole closed. I'll tie that off and singe them, and this part is done. Next step, we're gonna go ahead and add it to our front main panel. But first we wanna cut some snips along the rounded edges of this part as well, if you haven't done that already. I'm taking really skinny snips. I'm not going beyond like an 1/8 inch because of our 1/4 inch seam allowance. We really don't want to be able to see our snips when we add it. But these are really important to help them ease into those tight rounded corners. Same thing with your tape, just tiny snips around the curve. Okay, so you lay it right in the pocket. You're gonna flip it up like so. So then we have our notch here and our notch on our zipper tape, and we're gonna go ahead and clip those two together. So we have the right side of our zipper tape facing the right side of our panel, and we're just gonna continue to clip side to side, allowing this panel to naturally flip into place over it. So clip these around. I usually do a few along the top like this, and then I'll go ahead and match that bottom center marking because that's important. These landmarks are important so your zipper pocket isn't slanted. And then finish clipping the rest of them in, and then we're going to take it to our machine and sew it together. All right, So I did open my zipper because I find that it's easier to manipulate on my machine when this panel is zipped and unzipped and moved out of the way. So with the panel face up, I'm gonna sew so I see the wrong side of the panel and sew around that way, going this way. I'm pulling this out of the way as I'm very carefully going around the curves. It's starting to look like a backpack. All right, so now I'm gonna flip this over and we need to add the back of the lining pocket piece. So we're gonna line up our center markings and clip right side to wrong side of this zipper. So they gotta go inside, line that up. Same thing, right side to the, you should have it against the lining of the gusset. And then you're gonna go ahead and just ease in the corners, clipping. So I do tend to push it down and tuck it in as I'm lining up those edges. And get it all the way clipped, all the way around. And then we're gonna sew it pretty much the same way as we did the other one, using this seam kind of as our guide. We want to make sure we sew on the outside of it, otherwise you will see it on the inside of your pocket. If you've made our H2O to go sling, same concept there. We have to sew so you don't see it on the inside of your bag. Okay. Oop, broke that one. Pull it up, line up all these edges. Okay, so now we're gonna take it to our machine and I'm gonna let that naturally pop up and we're gonna sew just like we did before around this, attaching that back pocket. I did swap out to my zipper flip so that it's narrow and I could get close to this, because there's this 3D pocket kind of wants to push your foot away. So if you have a narrow foot or a zipper foot, you might want to switch out to that so that you can get really close to that little 3D gusset there. And then as I was sewing, going around these curves, I did make sure that I was using my finger to, so I wouldn't have any ripples and sewing those ripples, and it would catch like that. So you have to just go really slow around the curves and just make sure you don't sew any ripples. Now we're gonna go ahead and give this a good press, and then we're gonna top stitch. We're gonna top stitch an 1/8 inch from this bottom edge all the way around. And then as I'm going around, I wanna make sure that I'm pulling this nice and smooth back here so I catch that. And then giving it some good tension along the side because it tends to wanna pucker in a little bit because of that added pocket. So we'll start along the bottom, move the pocket out of the way. I'm pulling on the bottom with my finger. Again, I'm giving the side some tension so that we don't lose width. I find each time I'm doing any of the zipper sewing that if I can leave the pocket open, it seems to make it easier on me to move it out of the way and see what I'm doing. Put my zipper pull out of the way. Okay, there you go, a usable pocket. Okay, now take the last inner liner piece and we're going to put it wrong side face up, and we're going to take our completed exterior and lay it face down. You do get a little bit of shrinkage when you add on that pocket. You're just going to split the difference and clip it with these center markings all around the perimeter. Line up your corners and your edges. If you have a label you want to add, you want to do that before you add this back panel. Kind of smooth it out a little bit. And then once we get it all clipped in place, we're going to take it to the sewing machine and baste it an 1/8 inch around the edge to make it one piece. Okay, so we got our front and our back panels done. Let's set those aside, and we're going to put our main zipper panel and gusset pieces together. I find it easier to sew these pieces together without the pulls on to start, especially since we're using zipper tape. So we'll put these aside and we'll make our zipper panels first. So first things first is you want to lay one of your zipper panels face up, line the edge up of your zipper along that, and then you're going to sandwich it with your exterior like we did with the other gusset. So lining up all those edges, we're going to sew that together. I personally find it easiest to baste one layer on first before I add the other, just to make sure my zipper doesn't switch in between. So I'm going to put face down on top of my exterior and sew, baste this in place. Then I'll do my sandwiching. Sew it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, press both panels open away from the zipper, and then top stitch. So just gonna baste this, sandwich it, open it up, and top stitch. All right, by using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side, you should have a 1/2 inch worth of the zipper tape. So your finished panel will be 4 inches, which is what your zipper gusset panel is, 4 inches. Now we need to add the last 2 pulls to this main zipper. So just as we were doing it before, we have to separate it a little bit, put the one side on, and then bend this in. Make sure they're nice and equal. I like to, again, use my table as leverage. Pull it to the center. Then you have to flip around to the opposite edge. Separate your teeth a little bit. Thread one end on, bend it, fit it in that channel. I like to lay it down. Make sure it's seated well. And now you have a double pull. You want the heads facing each other, coming on from each direction. And now we can add on the gusset. So just like the front zipper pocket gusset, the gusset this time is actually longer than the zipper portion, so it's going to form an awkward loop. So we have the right side of the lining together. We're going to line up these edges here. And then we got the right side of the exterior with the right side of this. So we're going to put it right down on top and line up those edges and clip. Just like the other gusset, we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Sew it across and then open it up, top stitch, and we're going to repeat with this opposite end. So they're not the same length, so I do have to pull it to meet. Line up those edges. And now we'll go to the machine and do those the sewing and top stitching. All right, so this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Gotta open it up, pull both of the gusset pieces away from the zipper panel and finger press. So I want to pull it nice and smooth on both sides. We do have a loop here, so just kind of be mindful you don't catch the other edge when you're doing your top stitching here. And just sew a 1/4 inch away from that fold. And we got to repeat with this side. So finger press it nice and well, both sides. Now we have a giant loop. We have our center markings on the top and the bottom, so we can add our gusset to our backpack. All right, so we've got our gusset ready to go. So the gusset side seams, just like on the front pocket, we need to line up with the markings we have on our front panel. But we want the top part right side facing down on here. So we're gonna lay it down on top like this and line up those center markings. And then you're gonna just hold it as one and just fold it. So in these as one, line up that bottom edge, right sides together with this marking. And then the gusset, we need to flip this. So we're looking at the liner because we want always right sides together. So take that side and match up right at our landmark here. Flip this again. The side right at our landmark here. And flip. So now I'm going to go ahead and snip along the curves, front and bottom, and then ease in the clips. With the liner face down and the gusset face up, I'm going to just baste it real quick, well, an 1/8 inch from the edge just to get it situated. Then I'm going to go back and do a second row of stitching at my true seam allowance of 3/8 inch. So then I can go slow and make sure this is a nice rounded corner. Because if I'm trying to work around my clips and keep at the 3/8 inch seam allowance, sometimes it's really hard to go around a curved area. But by basting it in place first, it gives you a little bit more control to go nice and slow around those curves. I like to pop it out just to make sure that so far it looks good, that I've gotten all layers. It looks, my gusset hasn't shifted sewing, that it's nice and level. So now we got to go ahead and pop it back so it's inside out. And then we can open up our zipper. And we're going to add the exterior portion. So we always want right sides together. So I got to flip it over this way, and then we're going to line up our landmarks again. So I have the bottom marks on my gusset here with the bottom notch on this. And then the top, I got to tuck that in, right side to right side, right here. And then we're going to line up the gusset seam to the marking that we had on this side here that I had marked with my gold pen. It's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to put that together. And I did another gold marking here, line it up with that seam, and clip, and then cut more small notches around these curves, and then we're going to ease it in. Again, I find it easiest to sew with the panels within the gusset versus trying to sew it like this, and I've got all this bulk to maneuver around. So always inside the gusset. I'm going to do the 1/8 inch just to secure everything, get the clips out of the way, and then I'm going to go back in and do a careful 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. So I like to turn it right side out just to give my seams a good once over, make sure everything looks good, that I haven't have a bunch of ripples or caught my strap or anything before I add my binding. So right now, before I even add the binding, it still has some pretty nice structure, but that binding actually gives it more of a skeletal type structure on the inside. So I'll have to turn it back wrong side out. And then before I add my binding, I'm gonna go around and just trim it so this seam is all nice and even. Because I know sometimes I take a little bit more seam allowance and then get, you know, around the corners, I take a little less. I'm not always entirely accurate, but when we add the binding, we really do want this ridge to be the same uniform thickness throughout so that the binding goes on without a hitch. Now we're gonna take your bias strip, it's 1 inch wide, and I'm gonna just cut off a little bit of an angle off of the edge just to reduce bulk so that I can fold this down and not have any raw edges. And then I'm gonna do, so I could sew once again inside the gusset, I'm going to fold it right at that center mark, perfectly in half, straddling the raw edge. And then I'm gonna do this and clip it all the way around until I get back to the beginning, and then I'll tuck it underneath that finished edge. You should have a little extra tail left. This is where my folded beginning is, so I'm gonna just take off a little bit extra here. And then again, just kind of remove some bulk on this corners so that I could tuck it underneath this folded edge and not have it really pop out too much. Keep that fold. Line up those edges and reclip. Now, even though you would think you should sew as close to the edge as possible, we want to ensure that we're going to catch the other side. So because there's, I don't know, an 1/8 inch thickness, we're still going to stick with our 3/8 inch seam allowance, which will leave a little bit of extra tape on this side. And this will at least ensure that we catch the back side, and we can always go back when we're done and trim away very carefully the extra tape if that bothers you. I actually never do that because sometimes you can still see a little bit of my gusset seam, and I'd rather just use that to hide it. So now I'm gonna go do that. And as I'm sewing, I'm gonna use this finger to push this folded edge up against the raw edge, because sometimes the pressure of your foot as you're sewing tends to make this one pop off, and you may not catch all layers. So again, as I'm sewing, I'm giving it some counter pressure and pushing it nice and tight so that we can get both sides. So you want to flip it over from the side you couldn't see and make sure you got all of the edges. And you can see my previous stitching is right there. So it goes without saying that when you're adding your binding, make sure you're using a thread that matches so that it kind of blends. I also found that I didn't quite catch a little bit here, so I went back over this section. So now that that part's complete, we're going to go ahead and repeat that same process going the opposite way, because we went this way for this, but we want to sew inside the gusset. So I'm going to start the same process where I'm going to fold this edge and clip, starting at that center marking. And clip all the way around. Here it is, all finished, and I did a better job on this one. This is the side you can't see when you're sewing from this inside. So there we go. We have our binding on. All we have to do is turn our backpack right side out and push these binding up underneath the panel and inside, and that will give that little skeletal structure. But I'm gonna flip it right side out off camera, and I will show you what we're left with. All right, so I just turned it right side out. This is what we're left with. I put my hands in here to really push that binding up in there and out and get everything pushed really nicely. This is what you're left with inside. Get your slip pocket, and you can barely even notice that binding, but when she's zipped up, you could just feel that little structure that it adds. So last step, add the hardware to our strap, and our backpack will be done. So now you're gonna wanna grab your 2 strap adjusters. I like ones with rounded corners. Even the one with the movable bar, I don't happen to have it in silver, but I do have it in gold. This one, nice rounded corners, because I find that it can dig into my underarm if I'm using my standard square ones. These are a little sharp for me, so I don't recommend these, even though they're super pretty in my preference. Get something with a rounded corner. So you're gonna take the loose end, that should be your finished end, and you're gonna thread it through this and over the bar and move it about halfway up. So we're right here, okay? Take this loose end and go over and around this rectangle ring, and then you're gonna have this big loop here. So you're gonna wanna go from the top edge back down to the bottom edge. So I usually pinch them together like this to put them through, and then I can pull it and it will usually pull that part through, okay? So then you'll have it around that center bar, and I'm gonna clip this in place so that I can add rivets, or you're gonna take it to your machine and sew a row of stitches here, okay? So you wanna just make sure your strap is nice and straight, it's not looped, it looks correct, and we're gonna go ahead and repeat that with this side. So thread it over and around that middle bar here, pull it up here. Always making sure you're paying attention to the top side of the strap. Go around this bottom part and then go past the loop, and we're going back from top to bottom around that center bar. So I get it through. And then I kind of pull them together down so that it goes around that center bar. And clip again so that you can either sew that to itself there or add your rivets. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then our bag will be done.